We finally have college baseball back. Major League Baseball, not quite yet. But in the Big West, who's going to be the contending team? Who's the number one? Find out in the next episode of Sideline Sports Podcast. Welcome to Sideline Sports Podcast. If you're not on the sideline, it's not Sideline Sports Podcast. And we bring you back another edition of Sideline Sports Podcast. I'm the host, Alex Naveja, where if you're not on the sideline, it's not Sideline Sports Podcast, the source of your SoCal sports news. And alongside of me, a very good colleague of mine. It was one time I approached him before a CSUN men's basketball game. You guys may know his face, the voice of not just men's hoops at CSUN, but the voice of UC Riverside baseball, Ghizal Hasan. Ghizal, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. We really appreciate the time.
I'm an invisible man, Alex, with a visible voice. How's that?
Hey, you know what? They've got to recognize that voice. They got to know, hey, it's the voice of CSUN men's hoops, and of course UCR. Everyone's gonna recognize it.
Janae to the basket and one. Yeah, there you go.
Hey, there it is. That's how I know it's Ghizal. That's how we know it right there. But I know you're still focusing on hoops. How's everything going with that front?
Good. Got Hawaii coming in for a couple of games this weekend. Big West Hoops is rolling. I mean, we're into February, so that means March is right around the corner. Big West playing their tournament in Vegas. Excited about that. Hopefully everything goes smoothly. You know, there's a lot out of our control, Alex, as you know. But I'm just thankful to be calling games.
Absolutely. Always a great feeling once you're doing men's hoops and that March Madness coming around, the Big West tournament right around the corner. Hey, and you get to go to Vegas. I mean, that's a pretty fun trip there, but I think things will be very different. But tomorrow, college baseball is back. Not every Big West team is going to be back on the field tomorrow, but I mean, last year, I would say it was a pretty good year in the Big West concern. We had a variety of teams that were in contention. UC Santa Barbara, CSUN, Long Beach State, Hawaii, UC Davis. Another one, I'm missing one. Oh, yeah, UC Riverside, another team. They were all in contention. What were your thoughts on how the Big West was going before the whole entire pandemic?
I agree with everything you said. There were a lot of teams playing really, really well. Santa Barbara was kind of carrying the flag because they were a nationally ranked team. They were 13-2, of course, coming off the 2019 season where they went 45-11. So they've won 58 of the last 71 games they played. Andrew Checketts has that team playing so well. Long Beach, Eric Valenzuela's first year coming down from St. Mary's, they looked really good. You know, they play in Blair Field. They had the pitching going again at Blair Field for Long Beach State. CSUN got off to a 7-0 start under Dave Serrano, their new head coach. Who else was playing well? You know, Irvine was playing pretty well. Hawaii played pretty well. Hawaii, I think, took a series against Oregon, and they actually traveled to Nashville, played Vanderbilt, and they won a game against Vanderbilt on the road, which was pretty impressive. Riverside started the season slow. Remember, they got swept by UCLA, and they lost a midweek game at home to Seattle. But after that, they had won 9 of 12 and were playing really, really well. They played a tough schedule and were playing really well. We're getting ready for the Big West schedule when, of course, COVID-19 hit. And so it's interesting. I'm going to try to give you the best information I can, but you got to understand, I haven't seen a lot of these teams since 2019 because the Big West didn't have a conference schedule last year.
Right, absolutely. There were a lot of these teams, they were showing, hey, this is what Big West baseball is all about. I mean, not just UC Santa Barbara that was ranked, but also Long Beach State. Before COVID and everything, they were ranked number 12, and they hadn't lost a game, hadn't lost a series. They have lost a game, but they hadn't lost a series. And they were playing against some big-time ranked opponents, Xavier, Wake Forest, Mississippi State, and a lot of us were thinking, wow, Eric Valenzuela is really helping Long Beach State and really getting them to back to the Dirtbags way and back to the winning ways. But I mean, it's UC Santa Barbara who continues to look good last year, 13-2 before this whole entire pandemic hit.
Yeah, obviously Checketts has done a great. He's turned that team, that program into a power program here on the West Coast. They got the lights last year at Cesar Hueseca. They're going to continue to make improvements on that facility there. Now, I think my suggestion is, and Eddie Cornet, who's now at CSUN, used to be an assistant, and I'd always joke with him because I'd met him when he was at Riverside. I said, you guys should just build the stadium on the front of the campus so that you can hit home runs into the Pacific Ocean. Call Jim Rome. Call Michael Douglas, get him to write you a couple checks, and let's make that thing happen. But I'll bring up that Mississippi State series really turned a lot of heads for Long Beach State. And to be fair, they had one bad year. They had a bad year in 2019. They went 14-41. But you remember in 2017, they were like a pebble from going to Omaha. Remember they had that wonderful super regional at Blair Field against Cal State Fullerton. Ultimately, the Titans ended up winning in a very close series. It would have been 4 teams in 4 years to Omaha for the Big West had Long Beach State managed to pull that off. Instead, it was 3. But I agree with you. And then you got to have my man Shotgun Spradling on because he'll break it down for you. He was the one. He called it the year before. I had him up in the booth, and we were talking about the Long Beach State situation and all the names that were involved, and T.J. Bruce and Dave Serrano and all these names were mentioned for the Long Beach State job. But he was the one who said, hey, I know it's a long shot, but there's connections there with Eric Valenzuela. At the time he was at St. Mary's, and he made that call. It was in May of 2019, and then obviously Coach Valenzuela got the job at Long Beach State, and I have a feeling that he's going to it'll be Long Beach and Santa Barbara tussling at the top of that conference for the next 2 or 3 years. The pitching, Seminaris is back. Ramirez, they have 3 solid weekend guys at Long Beach State. It's always about pitching with Long Beach State. They're a very good defensive team. They can get any bit of offense. They'll be a force to deal with. And obviously Santa Barbara, studs throwing the baseball. That's what Andrew Checkett specializes in since he was at Oregon working for George Horton, and he did it for Doug Smith. He had a bunch of guys from, he was Joe Kelly's pitching coach when he was at UC Irvine. So Checkett does a great job at Santa Barbara, and that program has grown with him. And they're kind of the bell cow of the Big West right now. But you never know. There's so many good teams, Alex, lurking. Fullerton has been off for a little bit, but I suspect they'll soon be the Titans again. Cal Poly might be a team to watch this year. Brooks Lee, the shortstop, he's the son of head coach Larry Lee. They were only 5-11 last year, but they may have something going in San Luis Obispo. Watch Hawaii. Mike Trapasso, everybody's saying they got a big group. They got a good group together there. 11-6 last year. I mentioned beat Oregon in a series, and they took a game from Vanderbilt in Nashville. I think it was the Saturday game they won in Nashville. So they've shown that they can compete against the big boys.
You definitely can't sleep on Cal State Fullerton and Coach Rick Vanderhook. This is a team that, it looks like they were on their way to a slump, but this is a team that you never take Cal State Fullerton lightly. And then that successful season that Cal Poly had as well, I believe it was a season or 2 ago that they had a pretty good Big West Conference run. They were defeating the competition.
Yeah, 29. They were 500, 28-28. They had a good conference record though. And remember with Fullerton, the Titans were just 4-12 last year, Alex, but they always play incredible competition in the non-conference. So they might have been a little bit down, but I think the record is more a byproduct of the teams they schedule. And if you look at their roster, they have pitching again. Their pitching is healthy again. This year.
Right. I think Cal State Fullerton is definitely can be a team that can be in the mix. Now, there's 2 teams that we haven't talked about, and these are 2 new teams to the Big West, and that's Cal State Bakersfield and UC San Diego. What do the additions of these 2 teams do for the Big West?
Bakersfield was always kind of tough in the WAC. They've been down the last couple of years. They had a coaching shuffle for a little bit. They were just 5-9 last year. In 2019, they were 24-35. They will be competitive, I think. Because they're familiar with the Big West. They always play a lot of Big West teams in their non-conference, so I think they'll be pretty good. San Diego could be the X factor because they were a Division II power. 2 years ago, they played in the Division II championships. They won a game and then were eliminated, double elimination, but they made it through the regional and the super regional in Division II. They won 17 of 21 games last year, did the Tritons, and they have some familiarity with the Big West. One of their top assistants is Bryson LeBlanc. One of their assistant coaches used to be on the staff at UC Riverside. He's an old George Horton guy who came down from Oregon, so he's very familiar with West Coast baseball and very familiar with a lot of the players in the Big West because he recruited a lot of them. And obviously the facility at UCSD is top-notch. I would expect San Diego to be competitive very quickly in the conference.
No doubt. UC San Diego was looking very solid there in the CCAA, and just with about almost every sport, it was really time for the Tritons to move into the Division I and move into the Big West, not just in men's volleyball, but in everything and every facet. UC San Diego was ready for that move. Now, going into this year now, Ghizal, what are you thinking about this year and as far as the Big West is concerned, who's going to really be that team to look for? Let's say if we're not going to mention UC Santa Barbara or Long Beach State, who is a team to really look out for?
We talked a little bit about Cal Poly, a little bit about Hawaii. I look at CSUN just because of what Dave Serrano's track record is. And the interesting thing for me is he going to play that Fullerton, having the number 3 hitter in your lineup bunt with nobody out in the first inning? Is he going to play that same way at Matador Field, which plays more as a hitter's park? They started 7-0 last year. They ended up 10-5. And I think he's got kind of getting the kind of players that he wants in there. And they've all kind of bought in. Now remember, they're going to get a bit of a late start. They're not going to start their season until March 19th because of LA County regulations. But I would expect Dave Serrano will get a lot out of that team talent-wise. You always look at Irvine, because of the facility, Ben Orloff carrying on Coach Gillespie's tradition. They got Trenton Denholm, one of the best starters in the Big West. So they will be competitive. They were 8-7 last year. Remember, in 2019, they narrowly missed the postseason, ended up 37-17. Probably should have got in, maybe lost a few too many games early that they should have won. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten in. I would give, a puncher's chance to both UC Davis and UC Riverside. The Aggies were 9-7 last year, but they actually played a pretty decent schedule, played some Pac-12 teams up there. And then UC Riverside, we mentioned already, started off 0-4, won 9 of their last 12. And they lose Cole Percival, which hurts them. But I think for the first time in a few years, they actually have the depth to back it up. Obviously, Troy Percival resigned in November. Justin Johnson is the new head coach at UC Riverside. But he's basically just going to carry over Coach Percival's program. And they're very strong in the bullpen. So the question for Riverside is, those young bats from last year, can they bounce back this year? Nick Pena did a great job with the bat. Joey Nicola, who's from Mater Dei, the first baseman, they project him as kind of a middle of the lineup thumper kind of guy. But they didn't get the at-bats freshmen normally get. Normally freshmen, you play 40 or 50 games. They'll get 100, 150 at-bats. They didn't get that last year. They didn't play all summer. So I'm really interested in what's going to happen. You would think the advantage would be the teams that have veterans on their club, but obviously we'll have to wait to see how it plays out once we play some games.
It's going to be pretty important only because it's a different format this year. It's not a 3-game series anymore. It's a 4-game series. You'll probably play that Friday evening game, a doubleheader on Saturday, and play that one game on Sunday. Or it could be a doubleheader on a Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday. No matter what, it's going to be a 4-game series. A lot of these teams going to be playing in March or even next Friday. There's only very few teams playing this week. Now, bringing back the big teams of UC Santa Barbara, Long Beach State, CSUN. Now, who are your top 3 Big West teams to look out for?
I hate doing this because I was telling you, because normally I feel pretty confident because I've seen everybody. I've seen most of the teams. I haven't seen the last Big West game I did was in May of 2019.
Wow.
So, obviously everybody's on board with Santa Barbara and they've been a pretty strong program. So I'm pretty comfortable with them. I saw Long Beach because they were young, remember in 2019 before they had kind of the fallout, when they had the fallout year, 2019, they were actually pretty young. So they got a lot of those guys have had a chance to develop. And so Long Beach, I like, obviously with their pitching too. I mean, they have 3 studs on that weekend rotation. So I have no problem with them. Then maybe a Hawaii, maybe a CSUN, maybe a Cal Poly or Riverside. Riverside, the thing about them is they do have experience now. The question is, are they going to have enough pitching depth without Cole Percival? Their bullpen is pretty deep. Can they find that extra starter? Every team find that 4th starter, that guy that can maybe give them some length on Saturday? And I never count Irvine out. Great facility, great tradition. Ben Orloff played in that tradition, went to the College World Series with them, went to Super Regionals with them as a player, and now he's the coach. So he can kind of impart some of that wisdom. And as you know, they have a great facility over there, Anteater Ballpark. So I look for the Big West to be kind of similar to last year. It'll be, probably Santa Barbara and Long Beach at the top, and then there'll be 5 or 6 teams kind of bunched in the middle to see, maybe to compete for a potentially 3rd and 4th postseason berth. I think the Big West will do well in the postseason this year. I think Santa Barbara gets in, a 2nd-place team will get in, and maybe a 3rd or a 4th-place team can probably squeeze in based on how they play. RPI is going to be an issue, right? Because no non-conference you're playing, but all the teams will be good enough to, I think, where the committee will look at that and realize that this is a really good baseball conference.
The Big West has a lot of talent, especially with the additions of Bakersfield and with UCSD, as we talked about before. Now, as far as my final question to you, Ghizal, is do you feel like these teams that are playing now, do you feel like they have the upper hand against the teams that have to play in March, like a Long Beach State, like a CSUN that don't get to play until March, and there's teams that are going to be able to play tomorrow night?
Of course, the more you can play, the better advantage you have. But if you have to calibrate that. The reason that the CSUNs and the Irvines and the Riverside are starting late in Long Beach, they haven't been able to practice. So you want to make sure you're getting all your reps, particularly for your pitchers. So if CSUN and Long Beach only started to practice 2 weeks ago, they probably don't want to start playing until their pitchers are all stretched out and ready to go. Now, obviously, if you're a team that starts early, you have an advantage because you can build up those guys. You've been practicing a lot longer. But then with all the things that have happened with regard to COVID, we already had Irvine and Fresno was already canceled. Their opening series was already canceled due to COVID protocols. So are you going to play for 2 weeks and then have to pause for 2 weeks because of COVID? Is that going to be an issue, right? That could be an issue. So I would say probably, Alex, the teams that can play early will have a little bit of a slight advantage. But once we're 2 to 3 weeks into the season, I think we'll see the teams that are really ready to go will be the ones that will be successful and have success going forth in the Big West and overall.
So, Ghizal, you're bringing in a very good point. I want to close down this episode with this. You talk about that 2-3 week stretch, and we mentioned already there's schools that are going to start tomorrow night. Schools are starting in March. Now, for those schools that are starting in March, how important is every game? Now, you're going straight into conference. You get no pre-conference matchups or anything. You don't get your University of San Diego or San Diego State. You're going straight into conference action. We're throwing you straight into the fire. How important is it to just get the ball rolling?
Yeah, it's important. I was talking to Justin, who's the head coach at Riverside. So they're going to start playing. I think their opening day is scheduled for March 5th. So they'll have 2 weeks to kind of play with before the Big West schedule. But what he told me, I think is similar to what a lot of coaches feel, is that a lot of these guys, Alex, haven't been playing, right? They didn't get any summer ball. They didn't get fall ball. They didn't get winter ball. So, Justin was telling me, hey, I have an idea of my players. I'm tracking my players. They're sending me, they're talking, sending video and whatnot. So I kind of know what's going on. But he's like, I'm not going to be able to evaluate them till I see them, 4 days in a row at practice. And I would imagine other coaches are going to feel the same way. And even let's say you started practicing in February, you're really not going to have much of an assessment. It's going to take a couple of weeks to get an assessment, particularly with the new guys. So, I wonder how much of an advantage it'll be. I just think once league play starts, everybody will be ready to go full bore, and we'll find out how that all works out. And yeah, if the teams have a couple of extra weeks where they've been playing and practicing, clearly that is an advantage. But talent can also wipe out some advantages, right? Would you rather be talented and have a head start, or less talent, or talented and have a late start, or less talented and have a early start? I guarantee you, every coach you would talk to will tell you, I'd rather be talented and have a late start.
Right. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see on how these later start teams that are going to be playing in March, see how they're going to fare against the teams that are getting an early jump. They're going to be starting tomorrow night. But that's all the time we have left here on Sideline Sports Podcast. We thank you all so much for tuning into this one. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please give this episode a thumbs up. Also, hit the subscription button down below. We're going to try to talk more about college baseball. And of course, the man, the myth, the legend right here, Ghizal Hasan, the voice of CSUN Men's Hoops, and of course, the voice of UCR Highlanders Baseball. Ghizal, thank you so much again for coming on the show.
Hey, appreciate you having me, Alex. Thanks.
Always a pleasure to have you on, Ghizal. And guys, if you have a question about any SoCal sports, anything at all, please make sure to put your questions, any comments down below. I'm going to make sure to put Ghizal's social media handles down in the description below, along with his website, so you guys can always reach out to him, follow him with all the action he's got going on. He's going to be a busy guy in the spring, so you guys got to check out what he has going on. And of course, listen to his podcast as well with CSUN Men's Hoops. But I'm Alex Naveca from Sideline Sports Podcast, signing off from this one. Hope you guys enjoy college baseball this season, and of course, enjoy Major League Baseball spring training.